Hi, and welcome back to Crime on the Clarkfork, the true crime podcast where I tell you about big crimes that happen in small places, with each case having occurred in areas with populations of 15,000 or less. My name is Mackenzie Spence, and I'm your host. If you listen on Spotify, can you do me a huge favor and turn on automatic downloads? This will help the algorithm recommend the show to others. And if you want to be notified every time an episode goes live, you're also able to click the little bell button on the show's page and it will send you a notification. At least on Spotify, that's where I listen to my podcasts. But if you're able to do so on other podcast streaming services that you may use, that will also help me out. Automatic downloads will automatically download the show, believe it or not, when it's released, so you're able to listen to it not on Wi-Fi or not on cell service. So if that's something you're interested in, that'd be fabulous. I don't have a lot to talk about personally this week, but this episode's going to be a little bit longer. So I guess I will just get right into it. So this episode, we're staying in the United States and we're heading south to Mississippi. The sources for this episode are People, United States Census Bureau, Reddit, Clarion Ledger, Action News 5, Dark Horse Press, BuzzFeed News, CBS News, Law and Crime, Oxygen, E! News, Daily Mail, WREG Memphis, and Find Law. Cortland, Mississippi, 2014. Population 514. In December 2014, a young woman was found burning to death on the side of the road in her hometown in rural Mississippi, 70 miles from Memphis, Tennessee. Jessica was found doused in fire accelerant on the side of the road next to her black 2005 Kia Rio, which was also on fire. She was immediately transported to the Regional Medical Center in Memphis via helicopter, but unfortunately, Jessica didn't make it and passed on Sunday, December 7th, 2014, at 2:37 a.m. Jessica Chambers was a regular 19-year-old girl. She worked in a clothing store, was a cheerleader and softball player in her high school years at South Panola High School, and often had attention from boys. While she did have an arrest record for selling drugs from time to time, no one in her small town of Cortland, Mississippi seemed to have any issues with her. She grew up in Cortland on the same street her mom grew up on. She lived across the street from her grandmother and a few doors down from her father and stepmother. She was known to be bubbly and generous, the kind of person that would give you the shirt off their back if you needed it or needed cheering up. With that being said, she did have a tumultuous home life. Her father was arrested in the early 2000s for manufacturing crystal meth and driving under the influence. Her neighbor was shot multiple times in his front yard in 2006. Her older brother died in a car accident in 2012, and she would often get in fights with her mother and move out for weeks at a time. At one point in 2013, she had gotten into an argument with her ex-boyfriend and claimed that he had tried to shoot her for not getting back together with him, but he claims that she shot at him to get him out of the house. On the night of December 6th, 2014, Jessica left home to clean her car and grab something to eat before returning home. She left her house in camouflage sweatpants and her hair in a bun, telling her mother that she'd be back soon and would clean her room before heading to bed for the night. About 2 hours later, Jessica's mom called her to check in, and Jessica told her that she would be home soon. The last sighting of Jessica was on gas station footage just 1 mile from where she was discovered aflame, and 90 minutes before. The footage was grainy, but in it she can be seen walking towards the gas station and waving at someone who she walks over to, which was off camera. The only other person that was picked up on that camera footage was a man in a striped shirt who was filling up gas and walked in the same direction that Jessica eventually did. Not long after she walked over to the unknown person, Jessica returned to the footage where she got in her car and drove away. That night, firefighters received a call at 8:09 p.m. regarding a vehicle that was on fire on Heron Road in Cortland. The firefighters arrived on the scene and began extinguishing the flames coming from the vehicle. As they were doing this, a young woman, engulfed in flames, in nothing but her underwear, emerged from the direction of the nearby woods. She was burned beyond any recognition and said 2 words, "Help me." She was quickly laid down on a blanket. The fire chief, Cole Haley, was on the scene along with a handful of other firefighters that attempted to figure out what had happened to the girl. They asked her who did this to her, and she responded, but it was hard to hear what she was saying with the commotion going on around them. Cole eventually laid down next to the girl to get closer, and he asked who had done this to her. She responded, but it was unclear if she said Eric or Derek. When they asked her what his last name was, she indicated that she didn't know. Cole then asked who she was, and originally he thought she said Katrina, but he was eventually able to decipher that she was saying Jessica. It is unsurprising that understanding her would have been difficult because, as it is found later, she had burns to her airway, lips, and tongue, which would have made speaking very hard for her. She was quickly loaded into an ambulance while responders were still attempting to understand what had happened. They asked her if Eric had done this to her, but according to the first responder, she had said no. The paramedic, Casey Auden, spoke with Jessica as she was being assisted by another paramedic, but eventually all Jessica was able to say was that she was cold. The other paramedic also spoke with Jessica and said that she understood their questions, but her speech was garbled. Even so, he stated that he understood her when she said the name of the person that did this to her, Eric. Finally, Deputy Chuck Taylor was also on the scene and spoke to Jessica, and he actually had known Jessica prior to this. He also testified that Jessica said Eric had done this to her. When he reported this to his superiors, they asked him if Eric was black or white. He then went back to ask Jessica, and she said that Eric was black. The girl was soon able to be identified as 19-year-old Jessica Chambers. Her father worked as a mechanic at the sheriff's department, so he was told of his daughter first. He told his wife, Jessica's stepmother, who immediately went to Jessica's mother's house and started pounding on her door to let her know what was happening. This was about an hour after Jessica's mom had been on the phone with her to check in. Jessica was quickly airlifted to Memphis, and at this time, her family was rushing to meet her at the hospital there. They pulled up to the hospital as the helicopter was landing. They found that 98% of Jessica's body was injured from the burns, and the only part of her body that wasn't burned was the bottom of her feet. The next morning, around 2 a.m., Jessica's mother, Lisa, sat with Jessica and told her that if the fight to stay alive was too hard, it was okay if she let go. Jessica died a few short minutes later. Authorities were able to track where Jessica had been before she ended up on the side of the road that night. Her phone records showed that she had stopped at the gas station where the final footage of her was captured. After she got gas there, she made a few more stops, one in an unnamed residence and another around 5 miles away in another town. She finally arrived at the scene of the crime about a mile from that gas station around 7:30 p.m. that night. The fire crew was called about the car being on fire at 8:09 p.m., and it was found that Jessica had been force-fed gasoline. Some had also been squirted in her nose, so the fire was not only burning the outside of her body, but she was also actively on fire on the inside. It's also thought that she had been knocked out at one point because she had a large gash on the top of her head. Authorities investigated every single Eric, Derek, and even a person named Jarek that lived in the Panola County area, as well as other counties that were nearby. When they got Jessica's phone information, they attempted to see if there were any Erics or Dereks in her contacts, but not a single one was found. They did notice that there were 2 Erics that she was friends with on Facebook, but both were cleared. Jessica's boyfriend at the time, Travis Sanford, was in prison at the time of her death, and even though he was behind bars, authorities looked into him. They wondered if he had thought Jessica had been unfaithful to him and had put a hit on her, but to police, his grief was so genuine that it did not seem plausible that he would have harmed Jessica in any way. There was one man, Derek Holmes, who lived in Cortland, Mississippi, that investigators did take a closer look at. Derek was a registered sex offender who was convicted of the exploitation of children in 2012. He had also been accused of stalking Jessica prior to her death. Even so, it was determined that Derek was not a good lead in the case because he had an alibi at the time of the murder. He was rubbing his mom's feet at home. You heard that right. His alibi that they cleared him with is that he was rubbing his mother's feet at home at the time of Jessica's murder. While interviewing other people, authorities found out that Jessica and a man named Quentin Tellis, a local gang member, had recently been romantically involved after being introduced by mutual friends. Tellis was born in Cortland, Mississippi, and had spent much of his time between 2009 and 2014 in and out of prison. His arrest record seemed to date back to around 2006, and he had been convicted for crimes such as fleeing from police and burglary. He had last been released on probation in October of 2014, and just weeks later is when he met Jessica. According to Tellis, he and Jessica had slept together one single time weeks before her murder, and told them the area that it had occurred. With him stating that it had been weeks since they had slept together, it's also interesting to know that he and Jessica had only known each other for 12 days total before her death. On December 2nd, Jessica had gone to the ER with Tellis to get some medicine, and then over the next couple of days, Tellis continued to text Jessica about he wanted to have sex with her, and his and Jessica's cell phones both pinged in the area where she died the night of her death, putting the two together on Jessica's last day alive. At first, Tellis denied that he was with her that day, but eventually admitted that they had been together in her car, but that he didn't kill her. Jessica's car's passenger seat was laid back, which is how Tellis described how he had left her car, and he had told authorities that he had been begging her to have sex with him, but that she had blown him off. Instead, she had asked him for money or to buy her some food. Tellis's story changed multiple times, which caught up to him more than once. At one point, he told the police that he had an alibi because he was with Big Mike Sanford the night Jessica was murdered. But Big Mike was able to prove with phone records and receipts that he was in Nashville at a Tennessee Titans game that night, nowhere near Cortland, Mississippi. To further authorities' suspicion regarding Tellis, when they brought him into the station for the initial questioning, he stated that he had only seen Jessica the morning of her death, and he had no reaction to the fact that Jessica was dead, even though he had admittedly spent some time with her the day she died. He then later changed his story again and said that he had seen Jessica the evening of her death to sell her marijuana. By the end of the questioning, Tellis had admitted to being with Jessica that evening until 7:26 p.m. Even so, the authorities interviewed more than 130 people, including Tellis, but didn't find any solid leads in the case. Since Jessica had been associated with gangs in the area, both through her boyfriend that was in prison and Tellis, the police went and spoke to the gangs to see if any of them had untoward feelings about Jessica. But they found that the local gangs had no problem with her and had nothing bad to say about her at all. In total, again, the authorities interviewed more than 130 people and also had over 20,000 telephone numbers analyzed, but unfortunately nothing seemed to be moving the case forward. Just months after Jessica's death, Tellis posted a video on Facebook with the caption, "I see dead people." He then posted again in June 2015 in all caps, "The devil can drive you crazy." Then, in August, he didn't show up to a meeting that he was supposed to have with his parole officer, and it was eventually found that not long after missing that meeting, he married a woman named Chiquita Jackson, and the two had moved to Monroe, Louisiana. A few days after Tellis and his new wife arrived in the city, a 34-year-old Taiwanese woman named Meing-Chen Msiao went missing. Ming was an exchange student at the University of Louisiana. When authorities went to her apartment to check if she was there, they found her body. She had been stabbed over 30 times, all over her face and her body. When searching the rest of the apartment, they found that her debit card was missing, and due to this, the police issued a warrant to see Ming's bank account. When they received the bank records, police noticed that there had been 2 recent withdrawals from the account, but both were dated after her death. This caused police to issue another warrant for phone records that had been associated with her account. When those records came back, they found that someone had called the bank and inquired about the balance and PIN on the account so they could make a withdrawal. The phone number was tied back to none other than Quentin Tellis. On September 14, 2015, Tellis was charged with 3 counts of unauthorized use of a credit card and possession of half a pound of marijuana, to which he was sentenced to 10 years in prison since he was a habitual offender. During the investigation into Ming's murder, they had found security video from Walmart of Tellis and Ming together, and a neighbor of Ming had given authorities a license plate of a man who had given Ming a creepy feeling. The man was then identified as Tellis. He had also been in Ming's apartment on July 27th and 28th, 2015, according to the neighbor, and that she had heard the 2 yelling at each other during that time. Also, the crime scene in Ming's apartment had been cleaned, leaving no suspect DNA, but the phone calls to the bank, GPS records that indicated Tellis was in Ming's apartment the day she died, and a receipt for 7 cents charged to Ming's card found in Tellis' apartment was enough to charge Tellis with Ming's murder. Further into that investigation, authorities had also found a pair of Tellis' shoes that had been spray painted white, but under the paint were dark stains that investigators believed to be Ming's blood. In 2016, Tellis was indicted for the murder of Ming because police believed that he had tortured her in an attempt to get her to reveal her PIN for her debit card. They believed this because in 2015, a man named Eric Hill told authorities that Tellis told him about a credit card robbery that he had committed where someone was stabbed in the process. Eric Hill is the cousin of Tellis' wife, Chiquita, and had also dated Tellis' sister back in Cortland. Since Tellis was already charged and serving time, he remained in his jail cell awaiting trial for the murder of Ming. Now, I'm going to take a second to see if you heard what I just said. Tellis had a connection to a man named Eric. Coincidence? Now, some news outlets have put together a timeline of the days leading up to Jessica's death on December 6th, 2014, as well as the day of December 6th. The timeline is based on testimony from the trials against Tellis, so I wanted to share this with you. So, on December 2nd, like I had said before, Tellis went with Jessica to the emergency room, and on December 3rd, Tellis asked Jessica for sex via text for the first time, to which she replied, "Oh Lord." Same. The conversation then continued, and Jessica pointed out that Tellis' mother and sister were both home and that they would freak out. She refused to go to Tellis' house if his family were there. On December 4th, Tellis texted Jessica that he was horny, to which she once again said, "Oh Lord." On December 5th, Jessica asked Tellis for money for food, to which he responded with a sexual proposition. She then told him that she only needed $6, and a few minutes after that, gas station footage showed Tellis walking across the street to Jessica's car and then back to his house. Now, on to December 6th. This is a timeline of the day that Jessica died. At 9:02 a.m., Jessica texted Tellis that she had just woken up. 9 minutes later, Tellis texted Jessica back that he had also just woken up, which actually is not true because prior to this, he had been seen on the gas station footage like before 9 a.m., but that's not really important. At 9:50 a.m., Jessica left her house, and at 10:08 a.m., Jessica says that she's going to go pick Tellis up. 1 minute later, at 10:09 a.m., Tellis texted Jessica that he was ready to be picked up, and at 10:13 a.m., Jessica pulled into Tellis's driveway, which was caught on video at the gas station because his house was close enough to the station that his driveway was able to be seen by their surveillance camera, but not the house. At 10:14, the two leave Tellis's house, and according to investigators, there was no one else in the car with Jessica and Tellis, but Tellis states that Jessica's friend Kesha was in the car when he was picked up. But then according to Kesha, she was picked up after Tellis and had been picked up around 10 a.m. It could have been 10:30, 10:15 kind of vibe. Around noon, it was testified that Jessica and Kesha dropped Tellis off around the store on Highway 51, the gas station, but security footage showed Jessica dropping Tellis off at his house around 1:30, so there's about an hour and a half discretion here. After dropping Tellis off, Jessica apparently asked him for money, but Tellis stated that she never showed up to grab it. He then later said that she did show up, but that he threw $10 into her car during the daylight hours. Sometime in the early afternoon, Jessica did return home and took a nap, according to her mom. At 2:03 p.m., Tellis texted Jessica. She then asked him what he wanted, to which he replied, "Some loving." Gross. Around 3:30 to 4:15 p.m., Chiquita Jackson, Tellis's girlfriend and future wife, tried to contact him to get her to send her some money so she could go and visit him. She lived in Louisiana, visiting him in Mississippi. At 4:23 p.m., Tellis called Jessica, and it woke her up from her nap. And at 4:30, Jessica texted Tellis that she was hungry and would go eat with him if he would pay for it. 5 minutes later, at 4:35, Tellis texted Jessica, "Call me." At 4:40, the gas station surveillance captured Tellis at the store. At 4:56, Jessica texted Tellis and asked, "Where are you?" At 5 o'clock, Jessica left her house to go get something to eat, and it was already dark out at this point. This was also the last time that Jessica's mother had seen her. This is when she had left that night. Between 5:24 and 5:30 p.m., Jessica was at the gas station, which is the last footage of Jessica that I had talked about earlier. At 5:29 p.m., Jessica called Tellis, but it went to voicemail, and it was the last call that she had made to Tellis. At 5:34, just 5 minutes later, Tellis called Jessica back, and then she picked him up from his house to go to Taco Bell in Batesville. Tellis stated that he didn't ride in Jessica's car to the Taco Bell, but rather followed her in Big Mike's truck, which we already know is false because Big Mike was not in town at this time and he had that truck with him. Tellis eventually admitted that he did ride to Taco Bell with Jessica. From 6:08 p.m. to 6:17 p.m., Tellis and Jessica's phones pinged off the same tower in Batesville near a Taco Bell, and at 6:17 p.m., Tellis made a phone call to someone. It didn't say who, and Jessica left the Taco Bell and then came back. At 6:25 p.m., Tellis and Jessica's phones ping off the same cell phone tower again, and then according to Tellis, from 6:30 to 7:30 p.m., he was in an area called the Sandbox, but then he said he may have been messing up his days. At 6:30 p.m., Tellis and Jessica's phones pinged off a cell tower that placed them in Cortland, and Tellis states that they had both gone back to his house. At 6:48 p.m., Jessica called her mom and told her that she would be home soon, but it isn't clear where Jessica was at this time. This is the last phone call that her mother had received, last time her mother had spoken with her over the phone. And her mom did testify that the background noise was really quiet, which was odd because normally when Jessica's calling, she's also driving, so it's a little bit noisier on the other end. So her mom didn't think that she was driving at this phone call. Between 6:49 p.m. and 7:26 p.m., neither Jessica or Tellis used their phones at all. And then at 7:10 p.m., a vehicle left the Tellis residence, and Quentin states that it was his uncle Sammy. At 7:26 p.m., a vehicle left the driveway next to Tellis's house, but the security footage is too grainy to determine what kind of car it is. But authorities know that it isn't the vehicle of the woman who lived there because she was at work at this time. At 7:29 p.m., Tellis's mother's car leaves the home and she goes to the gas station where she stays for around 20 minutes, which is also interesting because, again, Jessica didn't go to Tellis's house when his family was there. So the fact that she was there while his uncle and his mom were also both there is a little bit interesting. Now we're at 7:30 p.m. Jessica's phone pinged dramatically to the west, specifically near Heron Road, which is where she's eventually found. At 7:42 p.m., Tellis's phone finally wakes up for the first time since 6:49 p.m., and he texts Jessica and says, and I quote, "Honey, sorry I can't be there with you tonight," end quote. And then he continued to text her that he can't see her because his girlfriend is coming to visit from Louisiana. He then called his girlfriend, but it's unclear where Jessica or Tellis are at this time. And a lot of people believe that the text that Tellis sent to Jessica about not being able to hang out that night is actually just him trying to cover up that he was actively murdering her. At 7:46 p.m., Tellis calls Chiquita back and tells her that he is walking to his sister's house to borrow her Chevy Tahoe. Authorities point out that there is a cut-through trail that leads from where Jessica was found to the subdivision where Tellis' sister lives, and on this route is where Jessica's keys were found the few days after her death. At 7:50 p.m., a vehicle is seen pulling up to the shed in Tellis' driveway, which is where he stored his dirt bike and extra gasoline. At 8:04 p.m., Tellis' sister's SUV drove past the gas station at a high speed, heading towards Bateville and the scene of the crime. Investigators believe that Tellis was the one driving the vehicle, and then at 8:04 p.m., Jessica's phone pinged off a cell tower for the last time, and investigators believe that it eventually just got too hot and shut off. At 8:09 p.m., the 911 call was placed about the car on fire. At 8:26 p.m., Tellis was seen on surveillance video at Fred's store in Batesville. He was purchasing a green dot money card, and according to Tellis, at this time, he had also gone to the Piggly Wiggly in Batesville, but he wasn't able to purchase a money card there, so that's when he went to Fred's store instead. He then stated that he passed first responders on his way back to Cortland from Batesville, and he presumed it was the first responders that were headed to the car fire. During this time, authorities believe that Tellis changed his clothes multiple times and also noted that he had 36 minutes to get from Fred's store back to Cortland, drop off a vehicle, change his clothes. So this would have been all within a 36-minute period. At 8:57 p.m., the gas station surveillance footage captured an SUV driving towards Tellis' sister's house, and minutes later, Tellis was seen walking from his driveway to the gas station. So, that is the timeline. And it might be a little confusing. I'm going to try and piece it together and post a visual on my Instagram. So if you are interested in seeing it visually, stay tuned. So, with that entire timeline laid out, I do want to mention that just because two people's phones ping off the same cell phone tower, it doesn't mean that they were together. In rural communities, cell towers can ping from up to 20 to 30 miles away since there are so few towers in a certain area. And I just want to mention that because cell tower evidence may not be as convincing as other evidence in cases like these, especially if it can provide reasonable doubt. And if you can't prove that someone is really close to someone and only that they were within 30 miles of each other, that makes it a little bit iffy with that cell phone tower information. So I just want to point that out. In 2017, Tellis was actually transported to Mississippi to face charges of capital murder for Jessica's death. This was 3 years after she had died, and the prosecution believed that they had strong evidence against him. If convicted, he would face life in prison without parole. They had found texts and voicemails that Tellis had written and sent to Jessica that were seemingly incriminating, had video evidence of Tellis at the gas station that was close to where Jessica and her burning car were found, and when they finally found Jessica's car keys, an eighth of a mile from her car, Tellis's DNA was on those. It also came out that Tellis had deleted all of Jessica's texts, as well as her contact from his phone, stating that he didn't see the point in saving any of it if she was dead. Prosecutors claimed that Tellis strangled Jessica and thought that he had killed her, but when he noticed that she was still alive, he drove her car with her inside to the road that she was found on, ran to his sister's house, grabbed her car, drove to the gas station, and then returned to where he had left Jessica and set her and her car aflame. The defense attorney really pushed the testimony from Jessica herself about Eric or Derek doing this to her, and in the closing arguments, the defense ended it by stating that, and I quote, "Eric isn't on trial here today, but he should be," end quote. The fact that first responders stated Jessica had indicated that she didn't know the last name of her murderer was also an issue for the jury because she did know Quentin Tellis. With the amount of reasonable doubt that the defense was able to provide, the trial ended in a hung jury. A year later, in 2018, the case was brought forward against Tellis again. The prosecution brought in an expert witness, and that witness was a doctor that testified that there was no way that Jessica would have spoken discernible words when the firefighters found her. So even if firefighters believed she had said Eric or Derek, there was a chance that she was attempting to say something else, but that is what sound was able to come out of her scorched airway. They also brought in a witness that claimed that she had picked up a man not far from the crime scene because he was hitchhiking, and when he got in her car, he seemed really nervous and sweaty. He had asked her to drop him off at a relative of Tellis's house, but the witness couldn't remember if the person was Tellis or if it was someone else. She did remember that the man was black and in his 20s, and that she had initially pulled over because she thought the man was her cousin, and when she realized he wasn't, she still gave the man a ride because she knew the person whose house the man requested a lift to. Even so, the woman whose house she did drop him off at claims that Tellis was never at her house that night. Even with these new witnesses, the jury came back hung once again. They felt that Eric or Derek were too omnipresent in the case. Since he was not charged, Tellis was returned to Louisiana to continue serving his 10-year sentence in the theft and drug charges that he had been charged with while awaiting trial for the murder of Ming. The trial was scheduled for November of 2022 for Ming's murder, but Eric Hill, the man who gave a witness statement about Tellis informing him about a robbery gone wrong where someone was stabbed, recanted his testimony, stating that he was pressured by police to give false testimony about Tellis. The main issue with this is that while he didn't testify against Tellis in the court case, the interview was featured in warrants that were associated with the investigation. In the warrant, it stated that Hill had intimate knowledge of the crime that only the killer would know, and that Tellis had provided him with those details, specifically the fact that she was stabbed multiple times, which was not released to the public. When it comes to Ming's murder, the charges against Tellis were dismissed by a judge in 2022 because they claimed his right to a speedy trial was violated. The state of Louisiana appealed the dismissal because it was often Tellis who pushed the date of his trial back. Now, this is kind of ridiculous what happens, so stay with me through this explanation. In October of 2021, Tellus's counsel filed a motion for a speedy trial, but then stated that they intended to hire an expert witness. So the trial was pushed from January 2nd, 2022 to March 14th, 2022. Then, Tellus waived his right to a jury on January 18th, 2022, and stated that the expert witness had given an oral opinion of his findings but hadn't put it in writing. The court then paused the running time for the speedy trial request until Tellus's defense could get the statement in writing, but the prosecution stated that the request for a speedy trial should be dismissed entirely since Tellus's team was not actually ready to go to trial as they had alleged before. From February to October 2022, the trial date was continued to get pushed back, and this happened multiple times just due to an abundance of reasons, including things going on with Tellus's expert's report, the state's inability to read that expert's report, COVID-19, the unavailability of the defense counsel during specific months, and the state's expert not being available on certain dates. And then finally, a new trial date was set for October 24th, 2022. During this time, the time delays for a speedy trial were suspended for 60 days for reasons on both sides, as I had stated before. At this time, the state filed a motion for continuance. And on October 29th, 2022, Tellus claimed that his rights to a speedy trial were being violated and the motion for continuance should not be held. For anyone that doesn't know what continuance is, it pretty much allows more time to go over evidence and just to be really prepared for court, which is what the state wanted to ensure that they were doing. On October 13th, 2022, there was a hearing on the motion to continue the trial that was set for October 24th, 2022. The state brought up the fact that the 120-day time limit of a speedy trial motion would end on October 19th, 2022, and if the time expired, Tellus would be released without bail. They were then informed that if the continuance was not granted to the state and Tellus was released, the Mississippi Department of Corrections had a detainer on Tellus, which would require that he be transferred there to serve an outstanding sentence. The trial's court maintained the trial date of October 24th, 2022, and since it was required to release Tellus without bail, since the 120-day period had expired, Tellus was transferred to the Mississippi Department of Correction, and since Tellus was removed from the jurisdiction, his trial was also removed from the court's docket. Then, on October 24th, 2022, the date that Tellus was scheduled for trial originally, he filed a motion to dismiss or in the alternative release from bond obligation. It stated that he had filed a motion for a speedy trial and that continuances were granted to the state 3 times against his objections. He also argued that he had been transferred to Mississippi without notice and had been deprived of the ability to give his testimony, violating his Sixth Amendment rights. He then claimed that the actions of the state were so egregious that it merited a dismissal of the case, which I think is pretty rich coming from someone who is thought to have killed 2 women in extremely horrific ways, but okay. The trial court was also annoyed with the fact that Tellus was removed from their jurisdiction and the case was then removed from the docket, and they accused the assistant district attorney of preventing the case from going to trial and for being unprepared for court. This is when the judge dismissed the charges against Tellus in the murder of Ming. The state of Louisiana eventually determined, in April of 2024, that the trial court correctly released Tellus without bail, but that his right to a speedy trial was not violated, and the dismissal of the murder charge was an abuse of discretion by the trial court, and that the judgment was reversed and the matter was remanded. This pretty much means that the trial court did not have the authority to dismiss the case against Tellus. So that was reversed, and this case is still against him today. So, Lisa, Jessica's mother, died on October 29th, 2021, never knowing if there would be justice for Jessica. There are an immense amount of theories on the internet, ranging from her ex-boyfriend doing it, maybe a drug deal gone wrong, a jealous best friend that snapped, maybe it was her dad who had spent time in prison for cooking meth, white supremacists killing her for being in an interracial relationship, and some have even gone as far to say that ISIS did it. Some also think that Jessica may have gotten in over her head with some of the people that she had been hanging out with and found out things that she shouldn't have known. Her friend Lakeisha Meyer said that Jessica knew some shady people and had also sold marijuana here and there. And when she passed, there were gang members that reached out to the family to offer their condolences. Jessica's father also said that Jessica had made comments about how people thought she was snitching to the police a few weeks before she died because he had worked at the sheriff's office. As of today, Tellis has not been charged for the murders of either Jessica or Ming. There are no dates set for the initial trial in Ming's murder or a date set for a third trial in Jessica's murder. As time goes on, I will keep my eye out for updates and let you all know what is going on. But today, Tellis is serving a prison sentence in Mississippi for burglary and is set to be released on October 16th, 2027. And that is the end of this case. As always, please give me 5 stars on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, as well as a review on Apple Podcasts. I say this every time, I'm always looking for cases to cover, so if you have a case suggestion, please visit the link in the show's Instagram page at Crime on the Clarkfork. And I post pictures from the cases I cover on that Instagram page, so just go give that a quick follow and let me know what your thoughts are in this case, because there are so many internet sleuths that have been trying to crack this case that there is just so much information. I would love to hear your guys' takes. I also have stickers, so if you're interested in getting a really cool Crime on the Clarkfork sticker on the show's actual website, there is a thing that says buy me a coffee. I think the lowest thing is $3. In all reality, that's probably mostly going to go to the cost of a stamp at this point. But if you're interested, hop on over there, and I will send one your way. And I hope you enjoyed this episode. I will catch you next time with more big crime in small places.